Thanks everybody for having me. It's great to be here. Like Gabby says, my name is Joe Tallett and I am from Human Security. So at Human Security, what we do is we protect enterprises from bot attacks. So that could be the smallest independent websites all the way up to the largest digital platforms on the internet. We protect them, as I say, from bot attacks. So you may know us as, you probably see it maybe on my t-shirt here. You may know us as White Ops. So we actually changed our name about 2 or 3 months ago. And so if you've heard of White Ops, you've heard of Human Security because we are one and the same. And so our company, we started out in ad tech. It's kind of it's where we cut our teeth and where we developed our technology. And so whilst we now operate in a few different kind of areas where bots are a problem, we kind of always view ad tech as kind of our home, if you like. And so so today I am going to be telling you the story of Pareto, and I'm just going to get my slide. I've got some slides, so I'm just going to present those slides. So 1 second. Share my screen. Okay. Okay, I hope everybody can see my screen adequately. Yes, so the story I'll be telling today is the story of the digital gold salters. And so this is the story of Pareto, the Pareto fraud scheme, and what we can learn as a collective from it to keep our programmatic CTV campaigns safe. And so I guess I'll start the talk by saying I'm going to make a promise, and that this won't be a kind of a shock talk about the size of the fraud problem. You won't see any scary numbers. I'm not intending to send everybody away with kind of anxiety about what we do. It's instead intended to be a study and trying to extract some insights in order to kind of collectively be safer when we buy CTV. And so yes, with that, I will first of all probably explain the question that arises from the title of my talk, which is, what does digital gold salters mean? So salting is it's a term from the minerals and commodities industry. And it's a confidence trick. It's been kind of successfully pulled off for getting up to 2 centuries now. And this is the definition of it. So it is the process of adding a valuable metal, especially gold or silver, to a mineral sample taken from a mine in order to change the value of the sample with intent to deceive potential buyers of the mine. And so so it's what scammers would do in this industry, in this scenario. And like I say, it's something which actually has been a trick that's been used over almost a couple of centuries. It originated in the gold rush, and so the kind of original stories of gold salting are kind of are quite interesting. And so what the original gold salters would do would be that they would pack their shotgun cartridges full of gold dust, and then they would go down to the mine shaft, and then they would take their shotgun and blast the side of the mine with this gold infused shotgun. And thus kind of creating this embedded kind of sprinkled with gold look on the side of their mine shafts. And then, they would subsequently then dupe any unsuspecting gold mine buyer or prospector with the look of a jackpot, when really these mines were pretty worthless. So it's a sneaky tactic, and it's been used as well in more recent times. So an infamous story comes from the late 90s, another gold salting story. And in this instance, a very large Canadian gold prospecting company got successfully duped by a rogue geologist who was able to con them into buying a worthless gold mine in the heart of the Indonesian jungle. And the way that this rogue geologist did this was to file down jewelry shavings and kind of rings and necklaces, I don't know where they got them from, and infuse them into the rock samples that the company were using to value the mine. And so they pulled it off. It's a pretty infamous story. It actually made it all the way to Hollywood. So there's a film from 2018 called Gold, which tells that story. And so, like I say, it's been successful over a long period of time, or at least there's numerous stories of gold salting success. And the story I'm going to tell you today is the analogy in our world. So this is a story, it's a modern day story of digital gold salting. It comes from a scheme that we encountered at Human over the last year or so. And I'm going to tell you kind of how it worked, how they salted the gold in this instance. And again, like I said before, what we can learn from it. So it's the story of Pareto, which we named internally due to the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, where we find often that 80% of the fraud is sometimes perpetrated by 20% of the usual suspects in our game. And Pareto was a large-scale, persistent ad fraud scheme selling programmatic CTV and streaming inventory. And so they were able to effectively sell a worthless goldmine of spammy traffic and pretend that that was like the gold of connected TV advertising or kind of inventory available to engaged users watching their streams. And so I'm just going to go down and dig into this definition of this story a little bit. So large scale. So Pareto operated at a scale that was significant. So they averaged about 650 million ad requests every day over the course of the scheme. So it's significant. It was also persistent. And so it was active from right in the late part of 2019 all the way through to April 2021. And like I say, we encountered this at Human very, very early in 2020, and we defended against this. We blocked its traffic on behalf of our customers throughout that period of time. And we were eventually able to actively disrupt Pareto and take the attack down in April 2021. And so it's a story which is of a persistent attack. And it was targeting CTV and streaming. So this is all of the usual kind of platforms that you might expect. So this could be Roku, it could be Apple TV, Chromecast, Fire TV, Android TV as well. And so they kind of didn't differentiate in terms of what the fraudulent inventory they were selling was. Okay, so to understand Pareto and kind of why it's notable and its innovation within its context, I'm going to do a quick technology primer. And so I'm going to tell you about a technology called SSAI. That's server-side ad insertion, which is a technology which enables the pre-assembly of the independent parts of a video stream. So this could be the content part, like the show that you're watching, the ads which kind of get interspersed within that content, and then subsequent ad breaks as well. So server-side ad insertion allows the pre-assembly of these independent parts to happen on a server before it gets sent downstream for playback on a connected TV or streaming device. And so in sort of diagrammatic form, it all starts with a publisher SSAI server. So this is what the publisher runs to do this ad insertion. And they would take content from, as I've illustrated here, the content server. So again, this is the show, which again is the publisher's content. And they would make requests to an ad server for ads. And that would be like programmatic demand. So, calling out to the ad exchanges to get demand. Then the stitching process or the kind of pre-assembly process happens on the server, and it gets sent down to the consumer streaming audience in their homes as one continuous chunk of content. Now, this technology came about primarily as a response to two problems. And so the first problem that SSAI solved was a kind of a user experience problem, whereby if this assembly process happens on a CTV device, sometimes you can run into problems with things like buffering as the player itself tries to switch between streams, or you might encounter bitrate issues where one piece of content is served at a different bitrate of other ones, and it makes for a bad user experience. It also helps with ad blocking as well, because if a user has an ad blocker running on their device, then when everything gets sent as a single sort of monolithic stream, it's very difficult for an ad blocker to differentiate content versus ads, and therefore it helps to thwart ad blockers. So that is SSAI, but it does come with a significant headache, I suppose, in the world of tag-based fraud detection. And so under this naive SSAI setup, the tags which are served alongside the ad created from the ad server tend to get run on the publisher SSAI server. And so the fraud detection server is measuring the characteristics about the SSAI server, which is not our ideal scenario in terms of measurement, because the intent is for the fraud detection tags to run on the device where the playback is happening and the event that is being verified is occurring. And so that weakness, I guess, or that imperfection was exploited, as tends to happen in our industry, by fraudsters, And we saw in early 2020, we saw a couple of notable schemes that we called fake SSAI fraud. And so what would happen would be that the fraudster would just basically build a fake SSAI server and under the cover story of the exact scenario which I just mentioned, but they didn't. What's interesting in this slide is what's missing. So you'll see that there's no content server. So the SSAI server doesn't need one. There's no, and most importantly, there's no audience viewing the ads inside their homes. It's just the SSAI server. And that SSAI server orchestrates kind of all of the connection and communication with the left-hand part of the diagram, which is the advertiser and people like human who we're working on behalf of the advertiser. And so there's a that kind of presents an issue. And so, as I say, as a response to this, there was an evolution in the SSAI world and the introduction of something which I'm going to call SSAI plus. So this is SSAI with on-device detection tag firing. And so you'll notice the big difference here is this large arrow that goes from right to left on the diagram. And so the way this would work would be that the publisher SSAI server would not only send the content, the stitched pre-assembled content down to the device, but would also send the fraud detection tag down to the device, probably using an SDK on the device to actually run the fraud detection tag. And so this reinstates or kind of like preserves the fundamental advantage of having the fraud detection tag run on the device at the time of playback. And so it kind of presents a problem for the SSAI fraudsters who were previously abusing the naive SSAI setup. And this is probably where Pareto and its innovation is best understood, because what Pareto was the first fraud scheme which was able to adequately mimic this SSAI plus setup. And I'll tell you now how they managed it, how they pulled it off. So they kind of had two innovations or two problems that they needed to solve. So the first one I've called plugging the device gap. So of course what they didn't have was a engaged and what's the right word? Hungry for ads CTV audience. They didn't have the audience which the advertisers wanted, and so instead they had to plug that device gap. And so what they did have, and this is often the case in our world, fraudsters tend to have these a lot, they had an Android botnet, and so they kind of used the Android botnet in conjunction with the SSAI server in order to pull off the scheme and have this quote on device verification. And so that combination is what they did here. And so, I mean, a company like Human, thankfully, we wouldn't be doing our job properly if we weren't able to easily tell the difference between code which is running on an Android botnet versus code running on a connected TV device, which is what the fraud was, the cover story of the fraud. And so I'll talk in a second about how exactly Pareto had to solve another problem. But just going back for a second, Android botnets can perhaps be a little bit inscrutable, and I'll explain how they assembled this botnet. And so what they did was the Pareto actors distributed apps on the Google Play Store. And so this is a selection, here's 3 of them. They're like utility apps, simple game apps, those kinds of things. And they ended up getting an install base of about over 100,000 installs. And all of those apps had some embedded code in them, which enabled them to become part of this scheme. So Pareto operators were in control of a small piece of code within these apps that allowed them to form part of the botnet, and so and fake this audience in their homes. And so the second problem that they needed to solve, and this is kind of the key to the salting that they did, was this is effectively where Pareto kind of packed their shotgun charges with gold dust, headed down to the mine and blasted the wall. Because what they needed to do was effectively emulate the CTV devices from their Android botnet. And so this here is how they did it. So this is some code which is taken directly from the Android malware, which I just mentioned. And it reads effectively like a kind of a recipe or a set of instructions. What you can see hopefully on the left of this piece of code is that there's provides instructions for each of the CTV platforms that they were targeting. And so it allowed the Android malware to select a target to pretend to masquerade as, and then select these configuration items which are in this file. And what's particularly interesting and notable about this is that you might see, if you get in close, you might see the letters TLS here. Now this configuration relates to something called TLS. It's called Transport Layer Security, which is a cryptographic protocol which is used on the internet when two devices establish a connection with each other. And so this is how Pareto was able to fake that TLS interchange. And what it shows is that they've forensically analyzed all of the different CTV devices listed here. They've understood at a very, very fundamental level the way in which these devices behave when they connect to forensic ad servers such as ours. And they are able to kind of mimic that on the Android devices. And so what they're effectively doing here is rewriting the network libraries of the Android platform to make them look like it's coming from these CTV devices. And so it's a real level of research, and it's a real level of investment that they put into pulling off this scheme. And so hopefully that illustrates the kind of the science behind what they're doing. And so that was how they did device masquerading. I'm going to talk for the next part about how Pareto exploited supply chain transparency issues. So this is more about how they sold or laundered the traffic as opposed to how they faked the devices. And so what they did is they created hundreds and likely thousands over the course of the attack of what I've called burner seller accounts. And so much like a criminal would use a burner mobile phone for a couple of days, commit some crimes, throw the phone away, get a new phone in order to kind of evade any kind of persistent identifier that's associated with them. So Pareto did the same thing. So Pareto targeted accounts on server-side platforms where it was very easy to create multiple accounts, or it was very easy that there was a kind of a loose onboarding process whereby they could create these accounts. And then they would use them only for a short period of time. And the diagram on the right-hand side of the slide there shows that in action. So that's a few days before Pareto was taken offline. And it shows that each individual color is Pareto using a particular account on an SSP. And you'll see that they use those accounts for no longer than a day. So it's very, very fast rotation. And that kind of allowed them to shapeshift and make it incrementally harder to catch, but it's a supply chain kind of vulnerability which they exploited. Okay, so the story does have a happy ending, thankfully, and this is a slide which I love to present, and it kind of represents the demise of Pareto. And the story that goes with this chart. This is in April, when are we? About just over a month ago. And so, following a research breakthrough that we made at Human, we were able to attribute the scheme to the apps which I mentioned earlier, and from there, the infrastructure that Pareto was using to pull off the scheme. And so, as a result of that, we kind of moved quite quickly. We worked with Google and some other partners to kind of put in place a disruptive plan to take action against Pareto. And so, around about the 20th of April, we published details of the scheme with attribution, and Google in tandem took down the apps that were part of this scheme. And the kind of the nicest part of this chart is about on Wednesday the 21st, where we observed that the Pareto command and control server, so the SSAI server they were using to do this fraud, stopped responding, which was as a direct result of this disruptive action. And so whilst we were always generally able to detect and protect our customers from this scheme, what was fantastic was that taking this disruptive action, we were able to actually take them offline and kind of solve the problem for everybody. So that was a sort of a particularly gratifying end to the story. And so that's Pareto. And so I want to leave you with a couple of points. Like I said earlier in the presentation, the intention here is to give you very, very practical advice about how to stay safe. And so I'm going to give you 2 points. So the first one is, and taking the analogy of gold salting again, don't go down the mine shaft alone. And so hopefully, as illustrated in the earlier part of the presentation, identifying this kind of very sophisticated fraudulent CTV inventory is a real specialist expertise. And so it's not generally something which individual, I guess, buyers would excel at. And so you need to put it in the gold salting analogy, an expert gold analysis lab that can pick out these kinds of salting activities from a distance. So that's the first one. Don't go down the mine shaft alone. And the second one is know who's selling the gold mine. And so this one relates more to the supply chain point, which I made as well. So what we recommend is that you adopt transparent supply chain standards. So the IAB Tech Lab have just released, I think, appads.txt for CTV, or about to release. Sellers.json is another IAB Tech Lab initiative, which helps you to operate, or helps everybody in our industry to operate a transparent supply chain. And we recommend that you also kind of mandate your business partners to do the same. And so that therefore we can kind of all hold each other accountable and effectively beat the salters and drive them out of our ecosystem. And so, like I said, those are the big two takeaways. So please, if you're going to screenshot any slides, please make it this one. And those are the two, hopefully, bits of practical advice that can help and can kind of let you guys do the job of finding the real gold, which is the increasing amounts of very engaged connected TV audience. And so with that, I have no more slides, but I do want to take questions. So thank you very much. And yeah, I'll take any questions that you have.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. For a really good presentation. Also, thank you for that advice on how to solve minis. So let's go for the first question. So, how did human detect Pareto if it was doing such a good job of hiding?
Yeah, good question. So Pareto, as I mentioned, it had done a very forensic job of masquerading as these connected TV devices. But the job wasn't quite good enough, and I suppose where the scales are balanced in a company like ours favor is that we're able to look at a huge number of legitimate interactions that do happen on Roku's and Apple TVs and all of these connected TV devices. So we do have a very, very good view of exactly what real traffic should look like. And so in Pareto's case, whilst they did a pretty strong job, they weren't perfect. And so it was those little errors that they made in their masquerading configuration, which allowed us to initially identify the attack and then kind of keep hold of it as it shape-shifted or changed over time. And so we kind of got this original detection, which allowed us to follow it over time.
Perfect. We still have time for another one. So did Pareto only target connected TV, or did you see it faking traffic from other environments as well?
So it was only CTV, actually. It was a very specifically targeted scheme in this case. So we've obviously seen schemes on targeting other platforms, but for Pareto, it was a pure CTV target. And so they probably invested strongly in like I say, masquerading as these particular devices, probably with knowledge that demand is high